All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another discussion of Vagabond. In this case, we are covering the 10th Visbig bind up, which is going to be volumes 28, 29, and 30. And
Yeah.
joining me, as usual, is Murphy Napier. Hello, Murphy. How are you
Hey,
today?
Philip. I'm good. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. I'm actually really excited to talk about this bind up, these three volumes. A lot of
Me
things happen
too.
that I was really hoping would happen. And so I'm really, this was a very gratifying read for me this time. I've loved it all, but this was kind of things were happening in this one that I was really hoping we were heading toward. And I think it's only fair if we start by talking about. Now I know your motherly instincts must have really been gratified during this read as well, because you are always rooting for the wayward Matahachi.
I
And so
do.
I was thinking Murphy's going to be liking this. So I think it's only fair if we start with Matahachi. And
Really?
I'm
All right.
eager to hear your thoughts on
Yeah.
what has developed for him and really it's in 28, I think, mostly that we get Matahachi's arc being focused on for a bit there. So what did you
Yeah.
think of your boy?
My boy, he's still a mess. Sorry, one second. Mm. He's still a mess. That hasn't changed, unfortunately. But he is trying. And I think that that is a really big step in and of itself.
Yeah.
When you have kind of snowballed your life to the extent that he has, it can be really difficult to try to start clawing your way back into some sort of decency. So he's the one that found Musashi. It's actually because of him that Musashi, his life was saved.
Yes.
He genuinely did try to, whereas in the last section, he was trying to kind of rip them apart by saying things about Otsu and trying to dishonor her and trying to get under Musashi's skin. And this time he basically did the opposite, where he was trying to bring them together and he realized how selfish he's been. And he's really making moves with his mom and
Yeah.
in as many respects as possible, and he's still failing, he's still stumbling, he's still lying, but he's really trying to start to become the person that he keeps idealizing for himself,
Yeah.
but never is always trying to connive his way into instead of doing it honorably, and he's finally trying to force himself down a more honorable path.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he stops himself and he even says to himself, why do I keep lying? I want to tell the truth. Why do I keep doing it? It's so almost instinctual for him at this point.
Absolutely. And I think anybody can kind of relate to, maybe not in the instance of being a compulsive liar, but
Mhm.
kind of relate to creating habits in your lifestyle that have become so ingrained in your mind that your brain just, this is what we do. This is how we react. Even though you try so hard to change that mindset, it really is a habit that's built up so much that you have to kind of break it down and reform a new habit.
Yeah, yeah. But one good sign, I suppose, of his resolve is that he does change his appearance. He takes away the I guess it's a mask that he was wearing. At least
Yeah.
he thought it was. I mean, there's this whole funny thing going through there with him with the hair in front of his face. That was a great detail. And his like he's got his
His
like
sideburns.
sideburns and
Yeah.
he's looking cool.
Mhm.
And you know it's
Otsu doesn't even recognize him
Oh,
at
and
one
Sue doesn't
point.
recognize him. And she thinks it's why is that? Why is there? What's her hair doing? He's like, that's the look, and nobody gets that.
So silly.
I thought it was great. But a nice way of just sort of pointing out that he has really resolved to, because he shaves and he gets the hair out of his face, and it seems like he's very sincere
Mhm.
in this resolution. I do wonder what will if this is the beginning of his sort of, I don't know if redemption is quite the right word. We'll see, but will he backslide? Where is this going? I can't think that he's not going to interweave once again
Mhm.
with Musashi and Otsu. I mean, that right now his focus is on his mother necessarily. And I thought
Hmm.
it was wonderful. And he's not necessarily the best caretaker, but he is sincerely trying
He is.
to restore her. And there's that kind of scary moment when she coughs up the blood and he realized, oh, I have really screwed up here. I have really neglected
Yes.
her.
Yes. I think that there has to be some kind of backsliding in order for it to be an honest arc, you know? Humans just don't snap into a new personality.
Right.
Yeah. So there has to be some of that, and I do wonder if some of it's gonna come from his mom because it seems like it's too late, you know? I'm not sure she's gonna recover.
Yeah.
And if he loses her, it'll be interesting to see how he responds to that, because when he lost Gon, he really didn't change at all.
Right.
So his uncle.
Yeah.
So, when he loses her, if he loses her, is he going to spiral and go back to who he was, or is it gonna fortify him and make him assured that I'm not gonna do this to another person that I love by being so selfish? Um, or maybe she'll recover and she'll continue to be herself, and that will cause a little back and forth because, she can also be very conniving and manipulative
Oh
and
my
all that.
goodness. Oh, big time. I mean, she's also, his mother, a very manipulative person,
Mhm.
is going around with a narrative about
Uh-huh.
Musashi. Is not
Mhm.
really, not, maybe she believes it,
Mhm.
but she also has that quality, maybe even more effective, of imposing a narrative where you see right through Matahachi's disguises. She's very firm in
Yes.
her delusions, and asserting, no, this is what he is, and keeps
Yes.
insisting on it. He's a monster. He's a monster. And she refuses to see Musashi's humanity.
Mhm.
So yeah, she's, in a way, maybe he gets that from her, that quality of living in his chosen narrative. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, she does seem like the type of person that probably has strong-armed a lot of his life,
yeah,
like, determined this is the path and that's the way it'll be, so that is certainly a possibility on why he chose to run away and why he chose to go off to war with Musashi, which we saw more of in this arc as well, that little
yeah,
flashback that we got.
yeah, yeah. I thought that was really well done. So anything else on Matahachi, or
Ah,
should
we're
we
good.
move on? Okay, yeah. So you mentioned Otsu,
Mhm.
and she's going around. She and Jotaro are a nice pairing, I
They
find.
are, it's so sweet.
Right? I love
Yeah.
how they riff off of each other and how they're figuring out each other's issues in relation to each other, and they're independent but somehow parallel feelings about Musashi. I thought was really cool in this arc. So what did you think of Otsu? And we can also talk about Jotaro, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, I'll start with Jotaro because I think that he's such a well-written kid,
Yeah,
like, his affection for his master, but also his master can't, well, we'll get into that, his what he expected from his master has been shattered.
yeah,
And, so he's dealing with, kids feel so hard and they don't know how to handle all those feelings. And
right.
he really is the encompassment of that in this little section where he's just kind of all over the place and it's almost like a child thrashing around, not knowing what to do with himself.
Yeah,
And the way he is like kind of teasing Otsu, but also kind of trying to push her toward him. And, it just a very emotional, like it feels like he is the embodiment of emotions in this section. And I don't have a lot to say about that other than it's just a really good depiction of a child in distress.
absolutely. He, in relation to Otsu, it's interesting because he's perceptive enough to realize what Musashi means to her
Yeah.
in his childlike way, and so he teases it with the smoochies and all that stuff, and which he's still young enough to find kind of gross and all of that,
Yeah.
which I find very endearing. At the same time, he's very distressed and he's wondering about his own identity, his own dreams. And I think he identifies so heavily with Musashi that this idea that Musashi is no longer capable of being his master is a real crisis for him. And what does that mean for me? We saw it before when Musashi ran away from a fight
Hmm.
way back when,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, and he
suddenly his
rejected
ideal,
Musashi.
that's
Yeah.
what kids are like, right?
Yeah.
In relation to adults, particularly parental figures. So I remember when my older daughter was probably about 3 or 4, one day she looked up at me and said, "Daddy, you're the strongest man in the world, right?" And I looked down at her and I said, "Yes, I am." So, but then, they figure out as they
Hmm.
get older, she figured out, oh no, there are plenty of men out there who are much stronger. And at a certain point, in the early teen years, you can even become kind of lame to your kids. And that's an interesting development. And then they get older and they realize, oh, you're not a superhero. You're not the lamest person in the universe. You're a human. You're a person. And then they can relate on
Hmm.
that level. But we see this poor kid is worshiping Musashi. And
Uh-huh.
for him, to have his ideal taken from him is very scary, and especially
Hmm.
as a kid, he's an orphan and he hasn't had stability in his life,
Hmm.
so he's really seeking that out. And I think there are a lot of parallels between Musashi and Jotaro that really reinforce that too.
Yeah. I think he really never had stability with Musashi either. He spent most of his time chasing him,
Yeah,
but I think in his mind he thought that this would be the stability,
yeah.
and that really, now it's almost like it, so now what? You know? Like what am I supposed to do now? And with this world that builds up samurais and fighters and men with the most strength and immortality, it's like that really does seem like the only path for just about everybody we encounter. That's how they feel.
That's an interesting point, and you made me think about something that is really looming large. It's been raised before, how the way of the sword is becoming anachronistic. And we've talked
Yeah.
about the role of guns and all of that. And there's this sense, like in the late stages of European chivalry, that this is on the way out. It's an old ideal, and there's something very sad about that, the end of an era, that sort of thing. And this is something that is very important in this arc as well. That Musashi and people like him, he's an anomaly in a sense.
Mhm.
And, they're Kojiro is another. I think he and Musashi are the two sort of, wow. You see this wonderful example of this embodiment of this ideal at the very point when the ideal is becoming defunct.
Mhm.
So what did you, maybe we could pause before we talk about Otsu, and just talk about the role of that setting here. And I gather there's some like historical veracity to this as well, because
Mhm.
this period of great change in Japan, and
Mhm.
the whole idea of the samurai, the Ronin, all of that, this masculine ideal being sort of questioned and examined, and its relevance quickly fading, I think, at this point in history. And that plays a role in all of this, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a subtle shift that's happening just in Inue's writing as well.
Mm-hmm.
In characters like the man who comes to train Kojiro, or I don't think he comes to train him, but he's the greatest sword instructor.
Yeah.
And he comes and he meets Kojiro and very quickly sees Kojiro's just inherent skill
Yeah.
and immediately submits himself and says, "Okay, here, you have my title, you have all these things," right?
Right.
And I think that there's kind of a very subtle shifting that's happening in the characters that are the strongest, that are the best, that are the greatest, that are being humbled and that are having to shift their whole perspective. And
Mm.
that kind of that goes hand in hand a little bit with the fact that the whole world is about to shift its perspective. You know what I mean?
Do. Yeah. It's also interesting how we often find that when a set of social ideals like chivalry, or whatever the label is for the samurai way of life, the way of the sword, when it's on its way out, you find people grasping onto
Clinging.
it even harder,
Mm-hmm.
or trying to celebrate it even more, or
Mm-hmm.
idealizing it even more. And you really do see that in Musashi and in Kojiro, and the way people view them as embodying this way of life.
That's so true. And Ito as well
Oh my
seems to
goodness.
be,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
falling in that category as well. And people like Mononosuke, was it?
Yes, or it's close. And you're probably saying it better than I would.
It's kind of, it's been so long since I've seen his
Is
name
it
come up.
Muso? Muso?
Mu, mu, yeah, who
Was it
knows?
Gonna?
Gona, no, Gonanosuke was the uncle, was Matahachi's uncle.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Anyway, yeah. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
The young fellow who had the face paint and all of that.
that one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
Yeah.
what did you think of it?
Yeah, no, of the way, this way of life becoming,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I find it very poignant. I find it very, in a sense, sad, but also romantic. It gets
Mm,
romanticized a lot. There's a sense in which there's an examination where this is what I think Inoue is doing in a kind of meta way as well, from a modern perspective, is examining this whole way of life, because we do tend to, certain eras, we look back on like the Wild West, right? And we romanticize it. We think of it in certain as certain tropes, as
hmm
embodying certain archetypes, and we celebrate it. And it's a fascination with the past as well, which is something, as a reader and a writer, I find to be a very interesting exercise. The fascination with the past is, in a way, an acknowledgement of our own fleetingness, that someday somebody down the road is going to be looking
mm,
at our era and, wondering what our lives were like.
hmm
So it's an interesting exercise, because you are, simultaneously idealizing the past, but also there's a fear, I think, of our ephemeralness, of our mortality at play here. And that is a driving factor in this whole ideal. The way of the sword is, making meaning out of one's life, doing something that is powerful, doing something that is significant, that will leave your mark in the world, that sort of thing. And it's a very ego-centered idea, isn't it? Uh,
hmm
but it also has to do with finding one's best self, pouring oneself into something. And that's that idea of flow. You talked about flow in one of your videos from this prior week.
Oh, right, the flow state.
The flow state, yeah. And it's interesting, because there is a lot of theory about that. So I wondered what you had to think. Did that add to your understanding of
Oh
that?
yeah, totally,
Yeah,
totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so funny because we had just been talking about
yeah,
that very focused thing, and then as I was researching this, I was like, oh, there. Okay, so there's a word, there's something that we can kind of attach to it, and
yeah,
obviously there's smaller versions of flow state, but that really that focus, that single-minded focus. And I watched a TED talk from the world's greatest archer. Um,
hmm,
and she was talking about how she she didn't say it like this, but she was essentially saying that it's not so much that she's better than the people she was competing against. It was that she was able to lock into that perfect focus. And she wasn't there, and she kind of described just trying to get there, and then she saw a single leaf fall, and she was able to zero in on that so completely that everything else was lost, and she shot it and she hit the target, and she
wow,
became the world champion. And yeah, I just thought that was really cool that kind of we're experiencing that so much in this story, and kind of experiencing these characters trying to let the world fade away and trying to get to that very centered, single-minded focus.
yeah, yeah. It's a fascinating subject, and there's been a lot of study and some of the different things that can kind of trigger or help one ease into a flow state.
Hmm
And among them are, you want to be doing something that you're masterful, that you're really good at, but also something that gives you something new,
Yeah, that you
challenges
have
new.
to push.
You have to keep pushing. You have to be just slightly, whatever the challenge you're interacting with has to be slightly ahead of your skill level.
And that's exactly what these samurais are doing, hey?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they defeat one and they're like, okay, who's the next greatest? And
yep,
that's, yeah, that's exactly right. You always have to try to exceed last.
Yeah, I missed the very last part of what you said because it froze up a bit, but
Sorry. Yeah, you just always have to try to exceed what you did last.
yes, absolutely. And I see that in tennis when I play players who are better than I am. That's the best. I love that because I'm being challenged in new ways and learning new things. Also, another important, I guess, trigger is that is that you're in some danger. And of
Oh,
course,
right.
very true of if you're a samurai trying to pursue the way of the sword. But in your rock climbing, there is an element
Right.
to that where I mean, I'm scared of heights personally. So, your hobby would terrify me.
That's so funny.
So, I mean, I'm not so bad that I can't make myself
Yeah.
do a bit of that, but it's not something I enjoy. Whereas clearly you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's somewhere in your brain that knows I'm in danger here. If I slip, I can hurt myself, right?
No, not really. I mean,
No?
no, not for like top climbing or lead climbing. As long as
Okay.
as long as your belayer is good, then
Yeah.
like you're fine.
But you're not okay, but you're not like doing the solo climbing thing where they're going
No,
cliff face.
people who do what Alex Hommel does, like
Yeah.
he'll talk about that. The free solo guy, he'll talk about that, how like there's just something more freeing and more exciting, and he gets more out of it when there's not a rope, when it's just him and the rock. And I don't relate to that.
Okay. Okay. So you're saying, in other words,
Yeah, I like the rope, but the rope is good.
but
It's
he's like
nice.
Musashi,
Yeah,
right? Isn't he? I mean, I think
yeah,
it's a very close thing in some ways. Although he's not hurting other people, he's just risking his own life.
right.
So, which we
Yeah,
have to talk about because I think that Inoue does some very interesting things with the whole
with
violence
Musashi. Yeah,
aspect of this in
big
this
time, big
volume.
time.
But first, let's do Otsu, and then we'll get.
Otsu, yeah,
Yeah.
we sidetracked off of her. So what? How are you feeling about Otsu? We were both wanting her, like more of her in the series, and we're starting to get a little bit more. I'm curious what you think because I think I might have a controversial opinion. So you go first.
Oh, okay. Well, I did like the fact that we got into her perspective a little more, that she was able to realize something about herself, perhaps through Matahachi and Matahachi's assertion that, well, you just never really were asking for anything because that's what you're used to. You were an
Hmm.
orphan and you were just sort of, you were always on the margins and never asserting yourself. And I think that that was a moment of reflection for her. And
Hmm.
she's been, in a way, he held up a mirror to her that I
Hmm.
think she had considered these aspects of her personality much. She had just kind of gone with it
Yeah.
and accepted, oh, I just have to tag along here and take what's given to me. And that's sort of annoying to me, honestly, that she would be.
But she's very passive.
Yes, I don't like the passivity.
Yeah.
But I'm
It's
hoping.
annoying to you as a character trait or annoying to you that Inoue has assigned that trait to her.
Oh, maybe a little bit of both, but I'm
Hmm.
hoping that it's leading to a point where she is going to have a moment where she said, "Yes, this is what I want, and I'm going to ask for it. I'm not going to
Hmm.
sit by passively and accept what comes."
Hmm.
And then, of course, there's some gender aspects to this. That's I think very prominent in a way, without being said. It's because she's a woman, but there's a lot of that is the expected
Yeah,
gender.
it's a lot of cultural gender expectations.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
especially in that time as well.
Historically cultural. Definitely.
So I am rooting for her still and hoping that I don't. It's not that I hope she and Musashi get together and are happily ever after all. But what I'm hoping is that she has her moment
You're
of
looking for agency.
self-realization. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. I want to see her embrace her agency.
Yes. I very much agree. I don't feel like her character, there are things about her that I think are very not necessarily inspiring, but impressive. Like when she was saying, when I think it was Jotaro that was saying, "You hate the sword," and she said, how can I hate what the man that I love loves? I just don't understand it." And I think that that's a very humble way to approach life, to not understand something and not reject it because she values Musashi so much. So she's a gem, and whoever ends up with her is going to be a very lucky person.
Yes.
Uh, with that said, I'm not impressed with the direction things seem to be going with her.
Mm.
It seems like, first of all, I don't appreciate, and I know that this is a bit of the historical cultural time, where like marriage and settling down is like,
Yeah.
right,
That's
like
the
it's
ultimate fulfillment. Yeah.
pushed on people.
Yeah.
But I do feel a little bit frustrated with the way people are treating Musashi right now, with like, "Hey, settle down, get your wife, go, go." And it's like, dude, he's barely surviving in the moment. Like mentally, he's destroyed. Cool it, you know? But also with Otsu, even more so, where, and I understand that it's all from a good place where people are just wanting him to find happiness and find some sort of stability. But with Otsu, it seems like narratively, the push is that she is going to be the light that kind of awakens Musashi finding his stability.
Right.
And it seems like humans, like people are pushing her in like, "You're it. How will he survive? How will he become a decent human without you being a crutch to him?" And narratively, it seems like this is your destiny to fix him. And I don't like that personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
One, I just don't think narratively that's very interesting. She could be far more interesting than just to be the thing that fixes Musashi. Or
Right.
people are going to take offense with me saying that so boldly. The thing that helps him find stability. Um, but I also I think that her character could be more interesting than that. But I also just think that generally, human wise, having your character development and your fulfillment anchored to a human, to another person,
Yeah.
like that's never gonna work. That's not, he writes humans and their personal struggles so well. I'm not gonna get on board with him anchoring his redemption on a human, because I don't feel like that's a stable anchor. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Would you go as far as saying that we're edging toward the fridging trope here with her being basically the vehicle that inspires Musashi to change his ways and leave violence behind and all of
Mhm.
that,
I wouldn't say fridging, because I think fridging is when the person, usually a woman, is killed
or
to,
raped or something.
oh,
Yeah.
right, to be the motivation of that person, right, of the protagonist rising up. So I wouldn't say it's a fridging, but it is leading towards a trope that's not ideal, where it seems like her sole purpose in the story is to help him find himself.
Okay.
And I mean, like, it's I'm not offended by it. I just don't think it's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't think that it's and keep in mind, I don't have the full story's context. I can only speak for what I've read so far, right?
Right.
But I think that her character could be more interesting than that, and I also just don't really get on board with the idea that, he's in this turmoil, and then he finally does settle down with her, get married, find stability, and he's like, "And I'm better. I have resolved my life's issues." And I
Yeah.
think Inoue is a very talented writer, so I do hope that the direction it's looking like it's going in, I hope it doesn't go there, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I agree with you that for what I've seen so far, to me, indicates that it won't be as simple and where she saves him and everything's great.
Yeah. It's
So
just right now, people keep saying like, "You're the light. You're it.
yeah,
You're what's going," and then people on his side are like, "Get married. It's the best thing." And it's just like it feels like that's kind of what the narrative is leading us to. So I hope that there's a subversion of that.
yeah. And in his case, I suppose the thinking might be, well, he needs something to replace violence in his life. So he's been so dedicated to the way of the sword. He's been so super focused on that because that's we're humans and we derive our meaning from these kinds of pursuits, right? When you give your whole being to something, it consumes you. Unfortunately, as beautiful as it can be, as poetic and even transcendent, the ultimate result of this is you're killing people, right? And then that's the only way this really works. So what if he were to be given some other focus? Like, here's this wonderful lady who's really into you, and
Mm-hmm.
why don't you make her the focus of your life to give you meaning, etc. These relationships, I guess. But I take your point. I definitely do.
Yeah, and I do think that there is something to be said in finding a lot of fulfillment and settling down and
Yeah.
letting your family being your focus, but it just doesn't seem like that's what Musashi actually needs right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he has to work out a few other things, and
Yeah,
before he can have a healthy relationship of
right.
that sort. Yeah, yeah, that would probably be wise. And he's only 22 now, I think, in the story.
Oh
So
yeah, but I think historically and culturally,
yes,
yeah, that's like I'm getting old. Get married, boy.
yeah, you should be, having kids by then and all
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Little workers for the farm and all that. But so
But
yeah, I think those are some great points about Otsu. So
yeah,
perhaps,
we'll see. We'll see. It's very much based off of where we are now that we can discuss it, obviously. So
right.
hopefully we're wrong about where it's gonna go.
Yeah, well, I suspect anyway it's going to surprise us.
I hope so.
We'll see. But so we've been talking a lot about Musashi, and we've also, of course, mentioned Kojiro. So which one would you like to talk about first?
Musashi.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. I love his internal struggle in this section, bind up. Because yes, people are kind of pushing him towards marriage, but there's also push in a lot of directions. Your boy Takuan is here,
Yes,
and
yes.
uh, and he's doing some big push. It's so funny because Kojiro they're both labeled as needing to find a sheath, right? And Kojiro gets to spar and then be elevated, and Musashi has to sit in a cell and be preached at. it's,
Yep.
it's really funny, but it was really good preaching. He did a
Yeah.
good job. I love him kind of being able to see through what Musashi is really struggling with,
Mm,
being haunted by these 70 men who fell by the sword and what was left behind and the damage that it wrought. Kind of like with Din Shichiro, we saw the damage that was left behind in his death, and now we're seeing that even on a wider scale. It just kind of keeps rippling out.
mm.
And yeah, and seeing him being haunted by that, and then Takuan can see through that, speak to it directly, and ask him those hard questions. Who, when you clasp your hands together, who are you praying to? What is
Yes.
your ideal? What is at the highest point for you? And are you still being led by this selfish drive, this inward facing drive? And really kind of forcing him to ask these really challenging questions, and not necessarily telling him like, this is what I believe, so this is what you believe too now, but really just making him grapple with what's going on inside of him. And then we also have that visual representation of what's going on inside of him too, which followed him around, and oh, so many things with that. But I loved how it got smaller and it got less defined as Musashi asked those questions and wrestled with those things.
Absolutely. You have beautifully said. I liked that visual representation
Yeah.
of his ego. And I
Mm,
think is what that is. It's this me, I have to be the invincible under the sun. I have to be the strongest.
interesting. I
I,
like that label for it. I thought it was
I,
like the beast inside of him, but I like ego. I think you're right.
yeah, yeah. And I don't think it can be both, by the way. I think, good symbols are multiple things. And so I think the beast thing is very applicable as well. But yeah, my first instinct was, oh, it's his ego and that's interfering. And he knows it because he
Mhm.
reflects at one point, why can't I be like I was when I was a kid and I was just one with
Mhm.
the mountains and the trees and I had this feeling of oneness. And I was like, I knew I was this tiny mote in the universe, but at the same time, I was the universe.
Yeah.
He's talking about that transcendent state.
That wave.
And his attachment to ego is interfering with that state, and he knows it. And so it's really interesting to see him working that out. So I
Yeah.
love the visualization of that, with that the inky thing coming out of him, and then also the sculptures that he keeps making. And I love what Inoue has done with that, how he is, it's fascinating because I've done some art myself, and I tend to do a lot of drawing of, guess what, men with beards. And
Oh, really?
I feel like, yeah, people often are trying to, when they write, when they do art, they're trying to work out themselves in some way or other.
Interesting.
And I feel like when Musashi's carving this, he's carving himself in a way. He's carving, of course, it's a demon, right? And he's been called a beast and a demon,
Yeah.
all kinds of things. So I love what he's doing with the carving as well. I think that's another facet of the
Yeah, working through what's
visualization.
going on inside of him. And I
Yeah,
think too, earlier we saw him carving and he was making something and seemed like he was really pouring himself into it. And then somebody looked at it and they were like, oh, that's horrible. And he
yeah,
just like got rid of it. Right. And it
yeah,
was almost like he was putting himself, like what was going on inside of him, into this. And then he was once again told that that's disturbing, that that's upsetting. And so he rejected that once again, you know?
yeah. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, because he throws it,
Hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting, and you see Takuan and others who were looking at these objects with some fascination, and I think on some level Takuan realizes, oh, he's trying to figure himself out here by doing this carving. It's also meditative, that's another thing, probably conducive to the flow state, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Art and creativity, and
Right.
with the sword sharpener guy, right? When he's in the zone, he's with the sword,
Yeah.
But
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of jumping backwards now, since we talked about the lives that Musashi is holding on to and the damage that is caused by him
yes,
killing these 70 men. Otsu also, um, what was his name?
Ghost Ueda.
Ueda, thanks. Ueda.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
appears to her, and he's the one
yeah,
that's kind of pushing her on Musashi and being like, "You're the light. You're." Mwah. But also he's like, let me show you the damage that's been wrought. Let me show you. And I think part of it is him trying to honor these men that fell and, honor what they've left, how much suffering is left behind. But also part of it is revealing to her what's happening internally with Musashi so that she can understand and kind of relate to him on that level.
yeah, yeah. I almost wish, now I'm not saying this is a misstep or that it's wrong, because I like the fact that Ueda came back as a ghost, and I like how he would flash between the version of him where half his head is missing or a quarter of his head or
Sure,
whatever,
sure.
and then he's back to
Back to normal.
normal. I like that, and there's facets of him as well, that his hatred toward Musashi, and yet his respect, and
Hmm.
he wants him to die, and yet he doesn't want him to die, and all of that.
Hmm.
It's really cool. I almost wish, though, that he had been haunting Musashi. Not, it seemed wrong in a way for him to be haunting, and
Yeah. So
Otsu,
Otsu, she even brings that up.
yeah, like,
Where,
what are you doing with me? You should be
yeah.
with, and he's like, well, and then how do you know all that? And he's like, well, I just know everything, I'm a
Yeah.
ghost. And I thought, you know what, this would be better, I thought anyway, with Musashi. Maybe our commenters will have different thoughts on that, but
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
like his presence, but I just think, what if he had been with Musashi rather than Otsu? That would have been
Yeah.
more fitting, I thought,
Yeah. I
more
think
predictable.
Musashi already has Takuan there to help him work through stuff.
Yeah,
So he didn't need a ghost to. So while I agree that as far as just it would have made more sense for him to
right.
like, it doesn't really make sense for him to be like, hello, person who Musashi loves, allow me to show you what he's done. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense to me, but I understand how narratively to Inoue needed to have both of them work through that, and this was his way of making that happen.
yeah, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, you do have Otsu working things out through Jotaro, but
Yeah.
there was I think, some degree to which Ghost Ueda helps her to understand Musashi's violence, perhaps, in a
Right.
way that otherwise might not have happened.
Hmm.
And you're
It is
right. in terms of the amount of space that we already have with Musashi, and we needed someone
Right.
on her side more. But anyway,
Yeah. Well, and I think his introspection would feel cluttered if it had too much happening. Like his introspection, I think Takuan was all he for
yeah,
him to kind of wrestle through that and work through that.
yeah,
I still don't understand why Otsu needed to as well. But
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and Musashi also had, in addition to Takuan, there was the gentleman who was imprisoning him, right? Who was really trying to help him in a way, and his own dedication to the way of the sword being a motive. But there's that revelation where he says, "Well, actually, Sejiro and Denchichiro were like almost sons to me," and
Yeah.
that moment where Musashi's, "Oh, wait a sec," and he says, "But." The guy, I forget his name, but he says, but I realized that they were in the wrong,
Yeah.
and that you were the one who was being attacked. And though this wasn't a sanctioned duel or whatever, I know what was happening here. So
Hmm.
that was an interesting gesture of compassion, I thought. That was
Hmm.
very touching.
Yeah, I agree. And when he was pushing Musashi to teach, and I loved the question he asked when he said, "I want you to teach people what you've learned." And he's like, "What can I teach them? I can't fight anymore." And he says, "Or do you think that one must fight to get to where they are? Can your strength only be obtained through killing? And what does that mean for our children and our children's children?" I
Mm.
love that kind of confrontation of this ideal of the honor of a samurai and what it takes to be a great samurai. And he's like, is this really the path that we want our next generations going down? Is this really the way we want them to obtain this revelation as well? Has it been fulfilling?
Yeah, that's a great exploration there. And you get this idea as well that the ultimate goal in the way of the sword is to leave behind the sword.
Mm,
That's how you get to that point of complete transcendent realization. And we get these flashbacks to the older figures, the mentor figures that have been hanging around in Musashi's mind, going all the way back to, you even have the image of the granddaddy guru guy, Kami-Izumi Issei no Kami Hidetsuna, or Issei. Let's just call him Issei. Uh,
Issei.
so that guy who was actually the teacher of Seki Shusai, the Yagyu patriarch, and also the patriarch of the Hoizun in Inai. He was the teacher of these guys,
Hmm.
and that idea of leaving behind the sword at a certain point, and that is something that I think this older gentleman and Takuan are both trying to get across to Masashi, right?
Yes, I agree. It is interesting too because with Kotetsu, the sword sharpener, when he and Takuan have that conversation, which
Yeah,
was one of my favorite parts of this whole section,
yeah,
where he is kind of talking about the philosophy of the sword, which obviously he cares about very much as a sword sharpener, as someone who sees the beauty in killing because he values swords so much. It was interesting to see him kind of depict a lot of what we've already seen, where he says, when you level up, essentially, when you do beat the next opponent, you kind of just if things can be measured by levels, then when you get to the next level, you realize how far the gap is to the next level until you find yourself at the top and you realize that there's no one there. There's no one there to appreciate you. There's no one there to worship you for what you've done. You're completely and utterly alone. And it's almost like he sees the beauty in it, but he also sees the misery in it. And it's the misery that we've kind of witnessed other people being disillusioned and shredded by throughout this series.
yeah. Very much so. And in this particular bind up, we as you said earlier, we see the consequences of Musashi's killing 70 people. Now, yes, I'm not saying, if he was being attacked and he was defending himself, but he's
But
made
he
to,
could have gotten away, hey? He could
yeah,
have left. He
that's
made the
true.
choice.
He
Sorry,
did.
go
He
on.
did. He came back and fought them deliberately. So yes, in a way, it is his fault. And then you have these scenes of these mourning people, the mother who kills herself because her son is dead, the wife and the child who are now bereft, on and on and on. And the ripples of his actions are just tremendous. And I think that is really sinking into him as well. So it's really uh, at a point, I think, in his development where, we're seeing him at the end of this. He's been given a chance in a way to be an instructor, and you have this nice prison guard guy and these guys coming to him to sort of like, we're on your side and we're trying to help you, and then he knocks him out, and he's on his way to, he's kind of addicted, isn't he? I mean, he keeps pushing himself and his leg is really not up for it. But I
Well,
feel
his
like,
whole identity has been wrapped up in this. How do
yeah,
you just surrender that so easily?
yeah, no, it wouldn't be easy at all.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be easy.
I do want to hop back over to the 70 Men though, which
Yes.
you that's one thing that I love about Inue's writing the most is that, you mentioned, well, it wasn't his fault, but then it's like, oh, but maybe it was his fault a little bit, but that's what I love about Inue's fighting is that writing is that these men pursued Musashi, right? They wanted to kill him and to kill him dishonorably. Get him from behind if you
Yeah.
have to, right? So they instigated. He could have walked away. He didn't. He approached. He chose this fight. They chose this fight too, but their families suffer. And I like that he doesn't really moralize this side is right, this side is wrong. He kind of just shows the wrongness of each and the rightness of each and how there's consequences to it all. There's consequences for Musashi now to find how unfulfilling this choice was and how it haunts him, how many lives have now been affected by this choice.
Yeah.
These men who chose to fight, this was their like they could have stayed home. They could have stayed home with their families and they chose not to. And the consequences now their family suffers. So it's kind of showing the gravity of a decision like this and the long stretching effect on many, many lives. In a lot of different angles. And I think he does a really good job of showing that impact as well as much like in Vinland Saga, where Thorfinn is realizing the never-ending cycle of of revenge, and I take revenge on this person who now is their life is altered forever. So then they seek out revenge, and on and on and on we go. And that's kind of what's being illustrated here is this on and on nature of a decision like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it's powerful. It really is.
Yeah.
With one more major character to talk about, and that is Kojiro. And I wanted to ask you, you alluded before to the sword master who encounters Kojiro, and they have a bit of a little stick fight, and he realizes how out of his league he is. He says, well, maybe it's because I'm not used to fighting with a stick. And he takes out his sword and says, let's try it with swords. Anyway, I mean, he realizes by this point that Kojiro is deaf, but it's a clear signal, taking out his sword. Kojiro just continues with the twig and defeats him with a twig, even though he's wielding a sword. His response, I find it interesting because he basically just says, okay, I have realized I am way beneath this guy, so I give up everything. You have my titles, as you said, you have everything. You're my master. I'm dedicating, instead of my life to the sword, I'm now dedicated to you. I feel like there might be a slight critique of that response. You could see it as an honorable kind of, all right, I realize what I am now, and so therefore I want to be in service to something that is meaningful to me. And I know that I can't reach this guy's level, so I'm going to serve this guy instead of try to reach that level. I feel like there's a critique in there, though, because, are you going to give up rock climbing because you realize that somebody else is way better than you at it? Am I going to give up tennis because I know I'll never be at Wimbledon? It just seems like that everything or nothing kind of approach isn't very healthy. I don't know. What did you think of that decision of his?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think Inoue he's doing it on purpose, right? Is especially within the same section where Kotetsu talks about how as you keep elevating, you realize it's lonely at the top, right?
Right.
So in that same section, we have someone who's at the top, realizes that he's not at the top, and surrenders everything. And there's a humility to that of, okay, now I'll serve you. But there's also that emphasis on this desire, this drive to be the best, and nothing else is acceptable, and just,
Yeah.
give up if you can't be number one, is also, yeah, he kind of has a critical eye on that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you thought so, because I felt like, oh no, buddy, you don't have to do that, you know?
Hmm.
I just think there's a sort of an unhealthy response there, and a kind of obsession either way. But
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's that drive for immortality and for being the best, it's showing that unhealthy response, rather than just like you and I, who this we're hobbyists. We have no drive to be number one, so we're just happy to play the game, we're just happy to enjoy it. And I
right.
do feel like the elders that we saw that are still following Musashi kind of had that sort of mentality of, they weren't ranking themselves against each other, they were just loving what the nature of what it is, without needing the elevation, the self elevation, and they found contentment there that these other people seem to not be able to grasp.
Yeah, so there's a paradox, because in abasing himself, he is still being attached to his ego.
Yeah.
I can't be number one, then I am going to find this other thing.
Yeah.
Whereas the elders that you mentioned, they're in the now.
Hmm.
They're in the now. They're experiencing their full connection with everything, and realizing that they are in everything. There is the surrender of the ego, and
Hmm.
there's no need to be number one, because it's
Hmm.
meaningless. So I love that. Yeah.
I do too. I do too. And I will say that I have joined the Takuan fan club in this section.
Yes.
I mean, he's always been cool, but I
Yeah.
joined his fan club in this section. I think that he displayed a tremendous amount of humility,
Hmm.
especially when he sat down with Takuan, where he's
When
Takuan. He sat
he's
down with,
Musashi.
no, he sat
Oh,
down with a
Koetsu?
sword sharpener.
Koetsu, yeah.
Kotetsu. Oh, is it
I think
Koetsu?
it's Koetsu, I think.
Whoopsie, I've been saying his name wrong the whole time.
I might be saying it wrong, so let's
I think
don't
my
bet on
problem
it.
is there's a sword maker in One Piece called Kotetsu. So
Oh,
I think I Koetsu.
I think you gave him an extra T, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, Koetsu. Thank you
Yeah.
for correcting me.
Maybe. Yeah.
The sword sharpener,
Yeah.
because they have just baseline opposing philosophies,
Yeah.
uh, and yet they sat down and learned from each other. And I feel like I saw that for Takuan throughout this whole bind up, where he mentions his own doubt, and he mentions his own seeking of the faith, and then he speaks to someone whose life philosophy is opposing to his, and he asks him questions and listens to his answers, and just the humility of his his desire for understanding, for
Yeah.
greater understanding, and willingness to learn from anyone, even if he's not going to take Koetsu's uh, philosophy with him, but he might take a piece of it and kind of reshape it and learn from it and move forward. And I think that the most enlightened, um, the most internally successful people in life are those that truly believe that they can learn something from everyone, you know?
Yes. Yes, I so agree with that. And again, I think it's Takuan is in a way probably also saying, this is kind of what I'm doing in writing this series, right?
Yeah,
I'm trying to explore this
I
and
think you're right.
understand that, and it's him inserting himself again into the
Mhm, mhm.
story, and even in a way where he allows himself to preach a little bit toward Musashi, right? So
Yeah,
I really like that. I really
I
love
do
it.
too.
Yeah.
I agree very much.
So Kojiro himself, though, is going off to become a sword instructor or something, and it doesn't seem like it's necessarily going to be an ideal situation, because the swordmaster who has based himself and said, "You're going to be my replacement now," he's putting him into a kind of a difficult situation, it sounds like, because there are some factions where he's headed, this clan that he's joining. He's going to be, there's already some resentment toward this sword master, and so there's an
Mm.
acknowledgement that, yeah, probably Dingaling over there is not going to like this guy, so there's some tension ahead, I'm guessing, for Kojiro.
Yeah, and it looks like he and Musashi are possibly gonna collide again, because they specifically even said, "Maybe there's room for another one, another sword master," speaking of Musashi.
Yeah.
And at the end of this volume, we have Musashi, who's stepping into the teaching role, still craving what he had as a child and saying, I want to go back there. I want to go back to the mountains where I learned. But at the same time, then at the end, this time he prays to God, which he that he was kind of praying to his path. So
Uh-huh.
we've kind of, with this, we're seeing him shift away from a more self-centered sort of outlook of the powers that be and into, something else, something less focused on himself. But he prays, lead me to the next fight for my life, for the next opponent, right? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I don't think it's going to be another, I don't think it's going to be another spar.
Mm.
I think that this is his next fight for his life. Like the fight of life and death is one of spiritual and internal. And what he's praying for is a person to come into his life. Because I think he's officially physically and mentally done with pursuing the next fight of life and death in the samurai way. So he's searching for someone like Takuan who would challenge his life and his philosophy towards death, which is it comes, I fight, right?
Mm.
Challenge that and it be a fight of life and death in the more philosophical sense. How did you perceive what he said there?
I think you're right, or I hope you're right, but I also think that maybe Musashi doesn't realize it yet.
Mm,
That's where he might be heading, but to him it could be a physical thing as well.
sure.
But what he really needs is what you're describing.
Mm,
I think and I hope that's where I mean, I would suspect that's where we end up, knowing the tiny bit about him, the historical figure that I do know from the description of him in the at the end of every
mhm,
wind up. I suspect that you're right. I don't know if this is the stage where it happens.
mm,
I've been expecting him and Kojiro to have some kind of conflict, and maybe it's physical, maybe it's more spiritual, or the meeting. We'll see. But I do sense, like you, though, that they're somehow they're being positioned still,
mhm.
in a way that's going to end up with them. And I hope, because they've already bonded so beautifully. I still love that snowman scene so
I
much.
know. I know.
I hope that
It's
it's going
so
to be a
good.
confrontation that is. I know it will be one of respect,
Mm.
but I hope it doesn't end in irrevocable violence. So, but we'll see. Yeah.
I so I do think that if I'm on the right track, if it is spiritual and not a physical fight of life and death, I think that it's Kojiro. Just
Mm,
because in this volume they were both said to be swords that need a sheath, and then
yes.
not volume bind up. And by the end of the bind up, it said that they are each other's sheaths.
Yeah.
So I think it's gonna be them coming together and probably having a physical confrontation, but a sparring, and that they will challenge each other's view of life. So hopefully it's not gonna be that Otsu is what grounds him. Hopefully his conflict with Kojiro will help him to work through his internal turmoil on his own, and then he can find himself with Otsu if that's where it all leads.
Yep. I'm on board. I think you're right. I'm gonna bet with you, Murphy. So awesome. Well, thank you. Anything else that you want to say about any of these three volumes before we call it a day?
I would love to just briefly mention that my chain and sickle guy made a little appearance in
Yes,
this,
yes, yes, yeah. It was good to see him. And although he didn't,
although it was just his body.
yeah, he wasn't in shape, was he?
No. Well, so okay, so it was Musashi's ego. I
Right.
really think I think you pinned that down. It was his ego that returned and was like, I'll just finish him off. Why did I tend to his wounds? Why did I do this? Right? Like that ego comes back and sees that he's already passed. He's already died.
And the
And
little
he
girl
says,
is still cuddled up, curled up next to him. That was hard. Yeah,
devastating.
yeah,
And then his ego, this is one of the things that knocks his ego down, is realizing he lost the fight, but he had a brave, noble end, and I sneaked away. So it's interesting to see that he did come to an end, which is sad,
yeah.
but I do think that seeing that really added a lot of impact to what Inoue was doing there.
Yes, yes. And we found out how he got and it was Kojiro that gave him the scar on his face
Mm-hmm.
after he poked the woman. He did a horrible thing. He
Mm,
poked this woman who was essentially, I guess, a prostitute, but one that he had interacted with himself and apparently
right.
felt some ownership over.
Right.
And so he poked her with the sword and put out her eye. And then
Mm.
Kojiro kind of says, "Oh, well, here you go." Whoop.
We won't be having that. Right.
Right. So that's how he got that scar, which is a reminder. Of course, you can't not have that scar and not be reminded, especially because it
Mm-hmm.
kept opening up again of
It
your.
is wild to see. Sorry, no, go ahead, finish
No,
that
no, no.
thought.
I was done. Yeah.
It is wild to see how tangled all these perspectives are, and even in those small ways, like this scar that's very important to his character. As you
Yes.
said, it keeps tearing open and it has that symbolism.
Yeah.
And it was given by Kojiro, who we never even knew that these two
Yep.
had collided at some point.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, we knew it was Kojiro. It had to have been Kojiro, but
Mm,
we didn't know how it happened, and now we know
right.
the tragic circumstances.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. So this has been a wonderful discussion as always, and I'm really, really excited, but a little bit sad, I have to say. I left a
I
comment
know.
on
Yeah.
our last video on your channel. It was like, oh man, we're getting close to the end here.
We're rushing to the end. It feels like
Yeah,
it's all of a sudden right on us.
yeah. So excited. I know this is a series that is incomplete.
Mhm.
So we'll see how satisfied we feel when we get to the end of what's in existence. But we'll join the many, many fans who are hoping that Inoue will return to Vagabond, I'm sure, when we're done with this.
Mhm.
So in the meantime, everyone, thank you so much for watching this. Please check out our earlier discussions. You'll find all the odd-numbered bind-ups. The discussions of those will be on Murphy's second channel, Murphy Napier Reviews. Even ones are all here. Of course, you can find them all in the playlists on both channels. So everybody, thanks so much, and until next time.